going to start. Good morning. Today's Daf Yomi is Chagigah 19. We're going to start on the bottom of 18b. 5 lines from the bottom on the bottom of 18b. The Gemara tells us, Hanotel Yadav, if one washes his hands, so before one does something, if one wants to purify their hands, if you have in mind niskavin, if you have in mind you have intent to purify your hands, then we say yadav tahoros. If you have in mind to purify your hands, then we say that your hands are going to be ritually pure. But if you wash your hands without any intent, then we're going to say yadav tameos. Then your hands are going to be ritually impure. So the Gemara says that's what one source states, whereas the next source states the opposite. The next source states, Tanya, but we have an alternative source which states Bain iskavin, bain lo niskavin, whether or not you wash your hands or you don't, whether or not you have intent when you wash your hands or you don't have intent when you wash your hands, yadav bain iskavin, bain lo niskavin, yadav tahoros, then you're going to say that your hands are going to be ritually pure. So according to this source, the first source says you don't require intent, but the second source says you do require intent for when you wash your hands. So which is it? We have these contradictory teachings. So Rav Nachman says that lo kasha, it's not difficult. Kan l'chulin, kan l'maisa. So it depends what you're doing it for. Like we said yesterday, and we've been talking in this chapter, that there are 5 levels in ascending orders of holiness, ascending order of holiness. One is one who just washes their hands for chulin, for regular food. The next level up is for meiser sheni, which is sacred food that a regular Israelite can eat. And then there's a third level, which is for truma, food only eaten by a Kohen. The fourth level is for kachim, the sacred food of the temple. And the fifth level is for the holiest of holy. That's the ashes of the water mixed with the ashes of the red heifer. So the distinction between these sources is if you're washing it for chulin, for regular food, you don't require intent. But for meiser sheni, you do require intent. We're on the top of 19a, and the Gemara says, Umana temra dechulin lo bai kavana. So from where would you even find this idea that chulin doesn't require intent? Where did Rav Nachman get this idea that chulin does not require intent when you wash your hands? What's the source for this idea? The Gemara says, I'll tell you the source. It's non gal shenitlash. If you have a wave, that the wave became nitlash. The wave, you buy the ocean and you're waiting for a wave. And now in order to immerse in a mikvah, a kosher mikvah has a minimum requirement of 40 sah. That's the amount of time, that's really like the amount of space a whole body can immerse in. That's a volume. So if the wave that's coming, and this wave has this minimum size of 40 sah, v'nafo al adam v'al kelem tahorin. If this wave comes and falls on a person or on his utensils that also need immersion, then we're going to say it's tahar. And says the Gemara, the assumption is that since the source says a man and utensils, katani adam that the man is the equivalent of the utensils, not kelim delomakav. Just like utensils are not capable of intent, av adam delomakav. So to a person is not capable. So to talking about a person who does not have intent. And yet, the wave that comes upon this person who's sitting by the beach, and the wave comes on him, he doesn't have intent, and yet it's still valid purifying process. So we see from here that for chulin, because that's the lowest possible scenario, you don't require intent. So the Gemara says, but that's not necessarily a strong proof, because umimai, why would we say that that's a strong proof? Dilma biyoshev umitzapa emasa yitrash agawaskinan. Maybe what actually we're doing here is this guy went to the beach in order to have the water from the ocean fall upon him. He's waiting for it. He has intent that the wave will come upon him. And moreover, not only that, once we're on the topic, we'll take your assumption that the utensils are similar to a person. Just like the person here has intent, so too, since the person is capable of intent, we're going to say here also the utensils are also having intent because you intend for the water to go upon them. And so that's what we're talking about here. So it's not a proof for the idea that you don't require intent. So the Gemara says, well, and if you're going to say, well, we don't like that analysis because it's not teaching us anything new, the Mishnah would have to come and teach us something new. And what's the novelty in this teaching? The person is sitting there waiting. He has intent. Obviously, the mikvah is valid. No, you might have thought, one possibility why you might have thought it was no good is that if you're going to allow this wave to fall upon him as a valid mikvah, he might come to immerse in a stream of water that's flowing down the mountain, and that's going to be ineffective. The reason why the stream of water coming down the mountain is ineffective is because such a stream of water is either there isn't 40 saw in the same place, it's not the minimum size all in one spot, or else because it's rainwater and it's flowing. It's not really a stream of water, it's just a pool of water flowing down the mountain, and it's not a spring of water. And so therefore that mikvah is not, rainwater is not valid in the mikvah if it's still, if it's ashboren, but if it's zocha and if it's flowing, it's not valid. And so therefore we're saying that that's the teaching that it's here. Or inami, or alternatively, what's it teaching? By the way, we want to pause for a moment. I see the Weissmans are here, and we're studying in memory of Mordechai's mother on her yard site, Adela Bat Raphael. So the alternative reason why we might have thought this was no good, this scenario where the wave was falling upon the person. Alternatively, why we might have thought it's no good, is because Nigzor Rush had to keep in. This is like the surfing you showed me from the email that we might have thought we're going to decree, because yes, it's okay if the water falls upon him while he's sitting down, that the top of the water falls upon him, but it's not effective if he jumps into the water, if he hits the wave like a surfer jumping into the wave. So then it's not valid if the wave is in the air and he jumps into it. That's keep it as an arch. So I might have thought that we wouldn't allow the wave immersion for the mikvah because we're going to make a decree about the top of the water, because you might come to get the water while it's still in its arch form. Kamash Mu'antz, that what this Mishnah is telling us to Logas Rina, that it's not effective. So that we don't make such a decree. It is effective to have a wave fall upon you as a mikvah. The Gemara says, Umana Tamer de Lomat Pilum Bekipim. But now the Gemara asks, even parenthetically, we're almost on a little bit of a tangent. Why can't you immerse in a mikvah if it's in an arch? Why isn't that valid? Why can't you jump into the wave or put your utensil into the top of the wave? The Gemara says, the Tanya, we learned in the Brayso, Mapilin Barashin, Meim Mapilin Bekipim. Yeah, it said we have a source. You can only immerse in the water when it basically the top of the water, as it hits you while you're on the ground, but not in the arches. You're not allowed to immerse in the air. You have to be on the ground when it comes to your immersion. So if that's the case, we don't yet have a source for this idea that when you wash your hands for chulin, for regular, the lowest level of purification, that you don't require intent. So the Gemara says, okay, we'll give you a different source for the idea that you don't require intent under those circumstances. What's the idea? The idea comes from the following source. What's the following source? The source is as follows. Let's say you have fruit that fell into a stream of water. Okay, so as a background, let me just say this. We need a little bit of background for this, and it's not so hard, but we know that some food items can contract tumah. If it's a dry food item, the only way it can contract tumah, it has a prerequisite to attract this ritual impurity. It needs to have had one of 7 types of liquids fall on it. There's an acronym to remember. It's called Yad Shachat Dam. It stands for 7 types of liquids, like wine and oil and honey and blood and milk and dew and water. I don't know if I skipped anything, but one of the 7 types of blood needs to fall on it. And then one of the 7 types of liquids need to go on it. But it's not enough to have the liquids go on it. You have to want the liquid to have gone on it. If you didn't want the liquid to have gone on it, then it's still not capable of contracting tumah. So now in this scenario, you have the fruits that fell into the stream of water, or this pool of water, ufashat, and then he took it out. So you stuck your hand in to get the fruits. So misha yadav tameos, if somebody's hands were tamei, then atlan, and now by sticking them into the water, he's taking them out. He washed them. Yadav tahoros. His hands now are pure, even though he didn't intend to purify his hands. They've become pure. So you see, you don't require intent. Uperos enon b'chiyutan, and the fruits have not become under the category of kiyuta. Means to say they didn't fulfill the prerequisite of being able to contract tumah, because you didn't want them to fall in the water in the first place. But if he stuck his hands into the water in order to wash his hands, then yadav tahoros, and his hands would be richly pure. Because the fruits then have become capable of contracting tumah. Why? Because by demonstrating that you want to wash your hands, you show you don't mind that the fruits are in the water. And so therefore, the water now is effective to say that the fruits are now capable of contracting tumah. But anyway, we see from the first source that from the first scenario there that the water does not require intent. You do not require intent to wash your hands. That's what we basically said. If you just stuck them in to get the fruit, then your hands are considered washed. So the Gemara says, so does this prove that you do not require intent for chulin? Eisvei Rabba or Rav Nachman. Rabba challenges Rav Nachman. Atova l'chulin. Let's say somebody washes their hands for chulin, v'huchsak l'chulin, and he has the intent for chulin. Also a meiser. He's not going to be effective for meiser sheni. Meaning to say it's only good for chulin. Like we said, there are 5 levels of ascending holiness. But a meiser. So doesn't this imply a meiser? It's also a meiser. Doesn't this imply huchsak in lo huchsak lo? Doesn't it mean to say that if he has intent for chulin, it's effective for chulin, but if he doesn't have intent, it's not. So don't we see from this that you would require intent for washing your hands for chulin? The Gemara says, no, that's not what we mean. Even though it is it means to say, even though you had intent for chulin, asur meiser, it's not effective for meiser sheni. It's not teaching us about chulin at all. It's saying even though you had intent to wash your hands for chulin, it's not going to be effective for meiser sheni. Gemara again challenges this idea that chulin does not require intent. Eisvei, another possible contradiction. Tavo v'lo huchsak ki'u lo tavo. It says that if you immerse but you didn't have any intent, it's like you didn't immerse at all. So we see from here that immersion requires intent. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. No, it doesn't mean that you didn't immerse at all. The Gemara says, no, it means it's not effective immersion for meiser. But it is a valid immersion for chulin. So Rabbah thought to himself when he asked this challenge to Rav Nachman, he thought, he thought he's just pushing me off, but he's just playing devil's advocate, so to speak. But really, he likes my source that chulin really should require intent. But no, nafak dafak. Rabba went out and he found ba'ashkach. He went out, he did some research, and he found a source that states we have an explicit source that if you immerse and you didn't have an intent, it's no good for the meiser sheni, level number 2, but it is valid for chulin, which is level number 1. And indeed, that's the idea that you do not require intent for immersion for chulin. For regular immersions, which are basically all our immersions today, you don't require intent. You're allowed to just immerse. Even you're allowed to, like, let's say you fall into the ocean, somebody pushes you off a boat. Do you need to go to the mikveh again? Technically speaking, based upon this Gemara, it would be valid. Some do want to say you require immersion, then they have to explain this Gemara. It's very difficult, but according to our Gemara, you don't require intent for immersion. Amar Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar comes along and teaches us a law. So let's say you immersed and now you came up out of the water, but you didn't have intent yet. But you still have some, Tosfos explains, you still have some drops of water on you. Then we're going to say under those circumstances, since you still have some drops of water on you, it's like you're connected to the mikvah, and you can now still make intent for whichever type of immersion you wanted. Gemara says, really? Are we really ready to say that? Meisvei, we challenge this idea because what does the source say? There's a brisa that states Odel rago achas b'mayim, that if you still have one leg in the water, so let's say you're coming out of the mikvah, then and while you still have one leg in the water, huchsak davar kal, malsak atzmo davar chamor. Now, while you still have one leg in the water, let's say your intent was for level number 1, let's say, or level number 2, Meiser, and you want to change it to Truma, you can do that as long as you still have one leg in the water. But once he went up, Shuveno Machzik. But once he went up and out of the water, he can't have any intent at all. So doesn't that mean my lab eno machzik klal? Doesn't mean he can't have any intent whatsoever once he's out of the water. So doesn't this refute what Rebbe Lazar taught us that he can he can make intent once he left the water? Or says no, that's not what it means. It means odeo while he's still in the water. Afal pisha hofsak machzik. Once he's still in the water, he can change his intent. Allah, but once he left, if he had no intent, he can make intent. But if he had an intent, then he can't change his intent. Okay, so there's an interesting idea that if you have no intent, you have more flexibility than if you had some intent. If you have no intent, you can make intent once you left the water, but if you had intent, then you can't change your intent once you left the water. Okay, so now the Gemara says, since we start talking about this scenario of a guy who's got 1 foot in the water, 1 foot out, we now go another scenario. Gemara says, we learned, Mantana Odel Rago Achas B'mayim. Who's the author of this source that says if you have 1 foot in the water, you could still change your intent as long as you have 1 foot in the water? What is that basically saying? You're still in the water. As long as you have 1 foot in the water, your whole body is still in the water. So who is this like? So Rav Padas says, Amar Rabbi Padas. Rabbi Padas says this is like Rabbi Yehuda. It's like another position we saw from Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanan. We have a Mishnah in Mikvos that tells us the following. We have the following scenario. A mikvah, we said, has to be a minimum size of 40 sa. Mikvah has to be minimum of 40 sa. So let's say mikvah shenimda, you have a mikvah that you measure. It's exactly 40 sa. The Yardu Shanayim, and 2 people go into that mikvah. The Tavu Zachar, but they didn't go at the same time. They went one after the other. So this first guy must have had a drop of water on him when he left. And the second guy is theoretically going into something that's less than 40 sa. Harishon Tahar, the first person is fine. He went in, he's okay. But the Sheni Tame, the second person, he's not valid because it's less than 40 sa in it. So the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, he said the second guy is not valid. So he says, that's the Tanakama there. But Amar Rabbi Yehuda taught Imayu Ragov Shal Rishon no Gaos B'Mayim Afa Sheni Tahor. Rabbi Yehuda says if the first guy's legs were still touching the water, then the second guy is also going to be pure. Why? Because we have a principle called good achas. Good achas is virtuality. Before there was the internet, the rabbis understood virtuality. So the rabbi said, since this first guy, when he left, he has drops of water over him, we're going to say good achas. We're going to extend those drops of water back down into the mikvah. And it's as though the mikvah still has 40 sa in it. And so that's the principle. So Rabbi Yehuda says, if you still have one leg in the water, since the water that's on you is still down in the mikvah, we view you as still being completely in the water. So the Gemara's, and the mikvah therefore is still kosher for the second guy. Because the mikvah is still kosher. So since you have 1 foot in the water, at that point, this is going to be consistent with the other approach that says that as long as you have 1 foot in the water, you could still change your intent. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avua, Machokas b'Maos to Rabbanan. He said this dispute about whether 1 foot in the water is still, you're still going to view the other water as coming down, and therefore the second person is in a measure of 40 sa. So he says that's only by rabbinic immersion, where you don't really need to immerse. What's an example of a rabbinic immersion? Where the Mishnah we're going to see later on requires immersion in a circumstance where a person was an onain, when they're not allowed to eat the sacred food, and now they're no longer an onain. So that person will require immersion for them. But that's only rabbinic. So by rabbinic source, we follow Rabbi Yehuda's principle of god achis. But by a biblical law, divrei hakol, everybody's going to say Ashenu tamei. But the second person is completely tamei because because we don't say good achas by biblical law in this scenario. V'hainu de Rabbi Pedas, and that's exactly what Rabbi Pedas was saying, that who is the one who says that you could still change your intent, because the intent is only rabbinic law. That's Rabbi Yehuda, who says that that as long as you have 1 foot in, it's okay. But the rabbis argued with Rabbi Yehuda. But an alternative version of this is Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav bar Avuha, Machokas mituma l'tahara, that the whole dispute is by a biblical level of a b'maus derabanan, but by a rabbinic law, divrei hakol af hasheni tahor. Everybody would say by rabbinic law that we would apply this principle of good achas, even the rabbanon. Who pleaded to Rabbi Das, and then argues to Rabbi Das because he said this idea that 1 foot in the mikvah is only good according to Rabbi Yehuda. This Ikadari argues with Rabbi Das because they say even the rabbis would say it. Okay, so now we say, okay, we said that we can view the water as extending down virtually as long as you have 1 foot in. What about, can we view the water as extending up virtually? So what's this? That's called good asik. They extend up. So this is the question. Ula asked Rabbi Yochanan the question. Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says good achis, shall rishon. So what about if the first guy goes in the mikvah, now he comes out and we want to drop a needle on his head, and is that going to be valid immersion in the mikvah? Because do we say that the water that's still on him extends up and is immersing that needle? So do we say good achas or Rabbi Yehuda good asik? Do we say we view it as technically extending up but not going down? Oh Dilma, or perhaps good asik nami, or perhaps we also say good asik, meaning say extends up. I'm right to Nisua. He says, well, this is actually, we had this source. This is a Tosefta. We had this source. Shalosh kama mios benacha. Let's say you have 3 ditches in a river, or not in a river, on a slope. 3 ditches of a flow coming down the mountain. The halyon and the tachtona, both the upper one and the bottom one, neither one have the minimum size of the mikvah. And the middle one. The top one and the bottom one, they both have 20 seah, so they're not enough. But the middle one is our bayim seah. The middle one is a valid mikvah. It's 40 seah. But and there's a stream of water connecting between them. So Rabbi Yehuda says that Rabbi Meir used to say, Matbil Bel Yonah, that Rabbi Meir allowed you to immerse in the top one, meaning to say that we view them as connected because of this principle of good asik. Meaning to say Rabbi Meir accepted that, but Rabbi Yehuda didn't. So that answers the question. Rabbi Yehuda, according to this approach, Rabbi Yehuda would not allow those needles to be immersed. Gemara says, is that really possible? Vatanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda said on the top of 19b, Meir Hayomer Matbil Bel Yonah, Vani Omer B'tachtona V'lo Bel Yonah. Rabbi Meir said you can immerse in the top one, and I say that you can immerse. Hold on one second. So he says, okay, so he says, but I say that you can immerse in the Elyona. But Rameir say you can immerse in the upper one, but I say b'tachtona v'lo b'el yonah. That I say you can only immerse in the lower one because I don't say good asik and not in the top one. And so we see from here that Rabbi Yehuda says that we don't say good asik. He only says good achas. We view the water as going down. And now, like Rabbi Yochanan was trying to say from the upper source, the earlier source, that he says we view it as going up, that you could also immerse in the top one. So therefore, Ula was refuting his Rebbe. Why did he ask the question in the first place if he had this source? That's a whole other question some of the commentaries want to say. Amar so Rabbi Yochanan said, fine, Tanya. If you have a source, you have a source. So now the Mishnah had said, Hatova l'chulin, hochsa l'chulin. Somebody immersed for chulin, it's valid for chulin. So Mani Masnisen, who is our Mishnah like that says if you immerse for chulin, it's valid for chulin? That's Rabbani. That means say it's valid for chulin, but not for level number 2 in the ascending levels, which is Meiser Sheni. Who is this source like? That's the source of the Rabbanan. The Shani will be chulin and Meiser. The rabbis draw this distinction between chulin and Meiser Sheni. They're 2 separate levels. So if you immerse for chulin, it's valid for Meiser Sheni. But Ema Seifa, but what is the next clause in the Mishnah? And it says, Big day Amaretz. Now let's say you have the garments of an Amaretz. We're going to assume that they transmit level of Tumah, Midras Leprushin. That if you're watching your garments, to say that everything you do in life is going to be in a level of purity, as though so that you can eat your chulin in a state of purity, then it's going to be tamei for prushim. That such a person is called a parosh. He's separate. Then, if you touch the garments of an amaretz, and you can see how this can be very socially divisive, it's going to be tamei for such a person. But it's a never-ending cycle, or it is ending, but it's a cycle because big day Perushin, if somebody is only careful to say, I'm going to eat my chulin in a state of taharos, but midras la'ochle truma, it's going to be considered, your garments, if you're only careful about chulin, are going to be considered tamei for somebody who's so careful that he wants to eat truma at all times, that he's at a higher level of holiness. So that goes, Asal Rabbi Meir. So that source, that second source, for whom it goes straight from the Perusha, which is chulin, straight to the truma, and he skips over Meiser Sheni, that follows the position of Rabbi Meir, who says, chulin Meiser Kadadi Ninu, who say that there is no distinction between the level of watching for chulin versus the level of watching for Meiser Sheni. So therefore, we're left in the unenviable position of saying that the first clause in the Mishnah follows the Rabbanan, the Reisha is the Rabbanan, the Sefer Rabbi Meir, and we don't like to say that. If there's an anonymous Mishnah, we like to say that the whole Mishnah is consistent with each other. So how do we explain the fact that the first clause is the Rabbanan and the second clause is Rabbi Meir? The first clause is the Rabbanan, who say that chulin and Meiser Sheni are distinct levels of watching, whereas Rabbi Meir says chulin and Meiser Sheni are the same levels of watching. So it answers the Gemara. The Gemara answers. Says the Gemara. Says the Gemara in Reish Rabbanan v'Sefer Rabbi Meir. That's exactly what it is. Whereas we have no choice. Rav Acha bar Ada masking of the Sefer. Rav Acha bar Ada taught differently. He says chamesh malos. He says actually umuki wa'kul k'Rabbanan. He says actually we're going to change the second clause of the Mishnah and add in this distinction. So the whole Mishnah is like the Rabbanan, and we add another level, which is that there's a difference between truma, between chulin and Meiser Sheni. And we'll just end with this last line, which will take up really tomorrow's daf. That there is a group of people that all of their life they ate the chulin as though it was kodesh. They took the regular food and they only ate it, even though it was regular food, as though it was kodesh, as though it was sacred food. And so then they since they took that upon themselves, it has the property of kadshin, meaning to say what Rashi says. Following very important Rashi, which Meir told us we should read. Adam haragil echol kachim, a person who has a practice to eat kachim, mekabo, he accepts upon himself le'echol chulav b'taras hakodesh. That always, even regular food, he eats as though they are this most sacred food. Why? Kadeshu b'nei beso zehirin u'bekiyin b'taras hakodesh. He wants the people of his household to be experts and careful in the guarding of the Kodesh. All right, I'll stop here. If anybody has any questions, happy to address them. Thank you. We studied today in memory of Adela Bat Raphael and Chaim Feivel Ben Baruch Esther. Shkoyach to everybody. Shkoyach.
Thank you.
Shkoyach. Shkoyach.